Hello, this is the third contact report between Semjase and Billy from Saturday, February the 8th, 1975, 3 minutes past 3 a.m. They meet in the middle of the night because Billy kind of had to snuck out at night and that his wife wouldn't find out because she would have created many problems and wouldn't have liked that at all. So Billy, since our last meeting, I have occupied myself intensively and much with the so-called UFO literature. In doing so, I came across the suggestion that you human beings from the stars, if I may put it that way, are always described as supernatural beautiful, and as protectors of humanity on earth, almost as all-knowing and as teachers, etc., and that you should therefore live practically in a spiritual and conscious perfection. But my intellect and my impression convey something completely different to me in this respect, and I cannot get over the fact that all this can only be lies. Lies that probably originate from sick brains or from brains that are not free and brand fantasy pictures as reality because the originators of thoughts cannot cope with the real reality and therefore escape into a fantastic pseudo-world. The reality seems to be too hard for them, so they flee into fantasies because they hope for help in these. And since these human beings never want to bear the responsibility for anything and everything themselves, because they are perhaps too unknowing or too cowardly, they simply pass it on to something that is supposed to stand above them and direct their destinies. They then call this something God and religion, a simple buffer and rambok into which one can pound everything, a fantasy picture onto which one rolls all one's own responsibility. Semjase, you are preoccupied with very deep thoughts, and they correspond to the absolute truth. It is really as you say. The Earth humans are not able to bear and recognize their responsibility themselves. Also, they should do so. So they roll everything off and onto something that they put above themselves in their imagination. Things that they simply call religion or God, that are supposed to relieve them of the responsibility. If deceivers label and describe us as you said just now, it is nothing more than an infamous lie, originating from the brains of consciously poor human beings who imagine a better life in their fantasy, and because they themselves cannot achieve it, at least not yet in this life, they simply attribute it to us and make us out to be something perfect. But we too are still far away from this stage and must continually develop ourselves further. We are not the so-called above-human or superhuman beings as the Earth humans like to call us in their unknowledge and in their imaginations. We are also no teachers, missionaries, or pioneers. We only have the dutiful task of preserving the developing as well as already existing human life throughout the cosmic space. This means that we strive to keep order and watch over certain life. Here and there, we approach the inhabitants of different worlds, if our directives allow us to do so, choose individuals from among them and provide them with explanations. This, however, only then when a race develops higher and slowly becomes thinking. We then slowly prepare them for the need to become familiar with the thought of not being the only thinking beings in the universe. Here and there, we also help on a telepathic basis to let certain cognitions germinate and to make technical inventions which are necessary at that time. Billy, why then do you not appear en masse and show yourselves to the general public? And why do you not get in touch with the most diverse governments? Semjase, without exception, all governments on Earth are staffed by human beings who have the characteristic of addiction to might and profit. Let me repeat this again. Semjase says, without exception, all governments on Earth are staffed by human beings who have the characteristic of addiction to might and profit. Now let that sink in for a while, because she doesn't just talk about the heads of state, she talks about the whole governments and all of them on Earth. So there might be, of course, a few people in governments who are not addicted to might and profit, but most of them are. And she says they are addicted to it. It's like they will not give up more power or more might and more profit. So they are greedy, and they are exactly the people we should not have in charge. So that's how they see it, and you can be sure that their observation is quite objective. So think about that for a while, and it gives, I think, many people a very different perspective. Under the guise of peace and friendship, they would only want to seize our beam ships to be able to exercise absolute Gewalt rule over the Earth with them. So Gewalt is a German word which they probably had a difficult time to translate, but it's violence, it's force, but it's Gewalt. But Gewalt rule, or to rule with force, it means tyranny. It's that simple, exercise absolute tyranny over Earth with the technology of the beam ships. That's what they're after. But they would also try to conquer the outer space because they know no bounds. And it's starting more and more, but you will see this more and more. All the governments will become more and more overreaching, limit us in our freedoms more and more, take our basic rights, and develop, global tyranny if we don't start to think for ourselves and speak up and resist, through violent non-violence, which is a term which I explain later, and they also talk about it and explain it. But they would also try to conquer the outer space because they know no bounds. However, they are not even able to, on this earth, create peace and friendship between the countries, not even among the human beings in their own country. So this is really devastating if you think about it. And some countries have civil war, like Yemen and Sudan, and so they cannot even keep peace in their own country, and also in other countries. And so we are so far just to establish peace that it's this is of course way above most people's head, what I read here, and few want to acknowledge that this is true, but it is. How then should they be able to have such means of might at their disposal, such as are our beam ships and their multifaceted facilities represented? There is no interest in showing ourselves to the general public. Their consciousness is still short and small and confined in religious enslavement. On the other hand, the earth humans would worship us as gods in their short reflection, as they did already in earlier times. And on the other hand, there would be many among them who, as criminals and greedy for might, once would seize our beam ships. So they are afraid that we would try to steal the beam ship, or people in power, and establish a global tyranny. So that's why they don't land publicly, or are interested in direct contact with anyone except for Billy. But there are also those who are not to be forgotten, and there are countless millions of them who would fall into complete hysteria and fall ill in consciousness. For these reasons, it is advisable for the time being to maintain contact only with individual Earth humans, and to, via them, slowly let the knowledge of our existence and task become known, and to prepare them for what is to come. We are no wardens or guardians of the Earth humans. We only feel obliged to them because our originators were their ancestors, before they fled from the earth as a result of self-inflicted catastrophes of some mighty greedy ones, and escaped to the Pleiades. By a hair's breadth, just as you have in the last decades deduced and calculated this according to all your knowledge. Only a few facts turned out somewhat differently than you had suspected. By and large, however, you have hit the heart and the bulk of history, and were the first human being to find the corresponding truth. Billy, my calculations are correct then. Semjase, of course, but about that I will report to you in detail at a later point in time. So this is pretty devastating. But it would be the case that if they would just land or so, then or any other group, that then either kind of worshipping would start, or people would become hysterical. Many people would become hysterical. But still, our governments should tell. This was in '75, and they want that Billy is better known, and that the teaching become better known, so we can overcome superstition and establish peace. Yeah, this is a difficult process, of course. There's this wide range of consciousness. that we have people on this planet which are sadistic, but we also have people on this planet who are very compassionate. And so when the story breaks, you have to tell all of them. So that's not so easy, of course, but it should be told to the public, and they have a right to know, and it should be told in a peaceful and non-threatening manner. But they're working on the exact opposite, unfortunately, and that will cause, of course, huge problems in the future. Okay, so Billy asked then, she said that she will tell him more details. And then Billy, even about Emmanuel, Semjase, sure, you are to receive information about Atlantis and Mu, though concerning Emmanuel you already have knowledge. You know the script of Judas Iscariot, which fully corresponds to the truth. So I do not have to explain anything else about that. Sekunde. Yeah. Judas Iscariot was a disciple of Emmanuel, who is also wrongly called Jesus Christ, and he wrote the Talmud Emmanuel. So Emmanuel didn't write it himself, but Judas Iscariot wrote it down. The Talmud Emmanuel you can read. I will put a link down below. Billy, but I would still be interested in one thing, Semjase. It has often been written that the human beings from the stars would become very old, millions of years even. What is up with that? Semjase, do you believe these claims? Billy, no, because it sounds too unlikely. I can only believe it when I look at it in the way that a human being of about 70,000 million years of age is no longer a human being, but some kind of spiritual embodiment. Semjase, you are right about that too. A human being is capable of living for several hundred or even thousands of years when it has attained a certain spiritual and consciousness-based relative state of perfection and a correspondingly high and healthy mode of life. But after this stage of about 40 to 60 million years, the spirit no longer needs a purely material body, and it becomes a half-spirit body. It then lives only half materially for another 60 to 80 million years. That's not correct, it's 60 to 80 billion years. And in such high spheres that one can no longer get in contact with it from the purely material human vantage point, unless there is a very high level of consciousness-based and spiritual evolution. After 60 to 80 billion years, then the half-spirit, that is, half-material form, transforms into the first pure spirit form and enters the level of Arahat Atasata. Billy, nice, but may I direct one more question to you, or even two? So to summarize this very quickly, so we live for 40 to 60 million years in a physical human body form. And in 40 to 60 million years, after many lives, we have learned enough that we take a half material. So this is, maybe you can compare that to a hologram. So it's still an entity, but it's not physical anymore. So you could, Billy said, you could like grab through that person. Well, person, yeah. But it's not a we form any. It's not yet a we form. It's still a form that perceives itself like we with an ego, and but of course spiritually much higher developed, and therefore not needing a human body anymore to make physical experience in that sense, but not developed enough to enter a we form where the perception is everything as we. There's no separation in that sense anymore. And that first pure spirit form level is called Arahat Atasata. And from there on, there's also 7 levels. It continues on. This will be, I'll explain that later in a different video in more detail. So that is basically the most simple form of our evolution. So we need like 40 to 60 million years to learn enough that the human body is not necessary anymore. So Semjase just asked, Billy, you're surely aware that our dear little women on Earth keep their age a secret, and that they smear their lips, face, finger and toenails with powder and colors. What do you think about that? Semjase, indisputably, they lie to themselves through their actions. Personally, I find makeup disgusting, but also all forms of painting the body as well as fingernails and toenails. Billy, I think so too, but how is it with all of you? Do you also live in this delusion? Semjase, definitely not. Billy, good. Then may I ask you how old you are actually? Semjase, certainly, but what do you assume? Billy, I have no experience in assessing human beings of your kind. But if I reckon according to my standards, then you would be about 32 or 33 years old. Semjase, you understand that field of yours, because it is how old I would really be according to earthly notions, based on my appearance. You do not know, however, that the average lifetime with us is very high and amounts to several hundreds of years, that is, about 1,000 years. So I am still very young and only 330 years old, which corresponds approximately to your 33 years by your understanding. Billy, what does my understanding mean here? If you had told me your average age beforehand, then I also would have assessed you differently. How could I know that? Because I also do not know everything. Semjase, it is all right. It was really my mistake. But now I must go again, and so farewell. So the Plejaren become over 1,000 years in general. And that was also where I had difficulties to believe that, or to accept that, and how could they be so old. But lifespan is also very flexible, and as she explains, has a lot to do with development of the consciousness and also living healthier. And in general, we become already older and older, decade by decade. And there are all these developments to live healthier, and despite we are poisoning our environment and causes lots of problems, but still we become older and older, And we could become hundreds of years old, step by step, you know, and will actually at some point. And Billy, of course, knew that they become over 1,000 years old, because Svart, his first contact person, became 1,100 years, something, 1,153 years old or something like that. And so he knew about it, but he kind of pretends not to know that, so to explain it to us in this question and answer dialogue between them. And yeah, so it becomes like a discovery for us, that we can discover this knowledge step by step. And it's also a bit kind of like a play sometimes, I think. And yeah, but it's never a play in a sense like fantasy or deceiving people or anything like that at all. You know, it's a educational method, a didactic method to teach us the truth. So that was the third contact report, and yeah, see you soon maybe.